Okay, so today we're looking at flexibility and cardiorespiratory training. That is going to be 2 chapters, 2 PowerPoints, but it is going to cover basically one section of that kind of general OPT template that we use to build workouts for our clients, right? So if we look at, this OPT template here, right, we're going to have the section at the top, the warm-up section, is where we put like all of our flexibility information. So we'll kind of show you guys how to plug all that information in today, and then how to follow it following NASM's OPT model, which is their training model that breaks down all the various physiologic adaptations that our body makes, right? So when you consider the different ways that somebody sort of develops, right? We're kind of breaking this down into 3 main distinctions, the stabilization level, strength level, and power level. And there's going to be rules for which exercises you are going to choose depending on which type of client you've got. So think of this as, think of the OPT model as like a cycle, right? You would start by building the foundation, and then you would build upon that foundation, and then you would put, the sort of peak roof type stuff on top, right? So all of your clients should be starting in the stabilization level whenever you're training like brand new clients. And then as they start to progress from there, you move them into the strength level and then eventually into the power level. And we'll talk about like sort of what that looks like here as we go through our flexibility and cardio stuff. So hold on just a second. Let's adjust that there. So introductions today, we are going to talk about the physiologic changes that occur in our muscles as we age, when it comes to mobility and flexibility. But then we will talk about how flexibility training can be used in a workout routine to help adjust our clients' posture, their patterns, and how that can lead to increased performance. So we're going to understand the rationale for flexibility training, how to safely progress an older client, yes, but really any client through flexibility training, and then how to apply the acute variables, meaning like how many reps, how many sets, what's the duration, things like that, with older adult clients, but really again, clients in general. So this is where we're sort of departing back. We are using the senior client as sort of an example here. And yes, we are in sort of a senior, program here, but my priority is not to prepare you for how to pass the senior exam. My priority is to prepare you guys for how to pass the regular NASM exam. So for instance, like we don't do a certain type of stretches with senior clients, but we're still going to talk about them in today's lesson. They'll be skipped over in some of those materials, but I still want to talk about them because they're relevant for most of your clients. So let's go ahead and define flexibility first before we actually start moving through all this. Flexibility is going to be defined as the ability, hold on, I need to zoom in here. The ability to move a joint through its complete range of motion, right? So that's the idea here, right? We want to be able to move a joint through its complete range of motion. So for instance, right, like your elbow should be able to flex to X number of degrees, and then it should be able to extend to a certain other number, right? Now, if we have decreased flexibility, that is going to decrease our ability to move the way that we're supposed to, right? Like as we get older, we experience joint stiffness, we experience like a loss of connective tissue and muscle compliance, things start to get, stiffer as we get older. But here's why that's like, pretty negative, is because one thing about flexibility that we don't really think about too often, but it decreases our proprioception. So remember what proprioception is, right? By definition, proprioception is your body's ability to understand where it is in space, right? It's literally your spatial awareness, right? So you've got these mechanoreceptors, these sensory receptors in your muscle. They're constantly communicating with your brain to say, hey, I'm currently at this length, right? Like if I told you to picture a person, like close your eyes and now imagine a person, right? And that person is standing upright, they're facing straight forward, Their arms are like their shoulder muscles, right? Their deltoid muscles, medial and anterior deltoids are contracted to about 50% of their max length. If you really think about it and you're like, okay, 50% of max length using my deltoid muscle right here, that should put my client in what position? Let's see how well this is like truly the hardest kinesiology type of question you could ask somebody. But if I asked you if that muscle's contracted halfway, what position do you think the body's in? Oh, and just so you know, you're on mute still. I don't know if you're chatting or not.
Oh, okay, no. If it's contracted halfway, what position are they in?
Yeah, what position are your arms in? This is a hard question.
If they're contracted halfway, your arms like halfway. So you're in a upright position, but like if you were like holding a weight, like it would be like halfway.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's hard to say. It's like, but you'd be like this, right? You'd be like in a T position, right? If it were contracted fully, you'd be all the way up here. And then if it were not contracted at all, your arms would be resting down here, right?
Yeah.
So here's the thing, right? I was able to describe that to you, and then you were able to take that information in, process it, think back to kinesiology, and go, okay, right? Like, and kind of break it down, right? So now if I got really complicated with it and I said, all right, your deltoid is contracted halfway, but you are also contracting your rotator cuff muscles almost fully. And then you are contracting your biceps about halfway. Like, oh man, that's a lot of information now, but it'd be like, okay, it'd be here. And then the rotator cuff would pull my arms back like this. And then the biceps would go like this. So I'd be flexing, right? Like I'm doing the classic muscle pose. So look at how long it takes us to kind of think about that stuff and consider those positions in order to like, know what position the body is in. If I like gave you instructions of like, okay, I want you to pose this person to look like this, right? You would like have to look at them and you have to like kind of follow the instructions. Your brain does that lightning fast constantly. And that's what proprioception is. It's information going up to the brain saying, this muscle's in this position, this muscle's in this position, this one's, and your brain goes, oh, okay, well then that means that I'm like this, right? That's really what proprioception is. It is your body's spatial awareness. And it gets that awareness because you've got two main sensory receptors that live in your muscles. You've got the muscle spindle, which lives end to end of the muscle, and it says how long the muscle is, the length. And then you've got Golgi tendon organs, which live in both of the tendons on every end of the muscles. Their job is to send the brain how much tension is in the muscle currently. So if there's a lot of tension or if there's very little tension. Then there's also skin receptors. There's also joint receptors. There's all kinds of other sensory receptors as well. So all of that information is going into the brain, and it's how your brain is interpreting that it's moving through this world, right? That's really proprioception in a nutshell. Now, what happens if the information's bad? Right? What happens if like, if I was trying to get you to make a specific pose and I wrote out instructions and then sent it to you, right? And, let's say like, the instructions got smudged, along the way, and you follow them to the best of your ability, right? Now we have altered proprioception. And this is really what we are addressing when we see someone who has bad posture, right? Like they're like, I'm standing upright. And it's like, actually, you're kind of not. And they're like, no, I don't know. And then like, I've had plenty of times where I've had clients like doing a stretch. In fact, actually, do you remember it was like I think it was our first meeting, maybe it was our second meeting.
Yeah.
But everybody's calf muscles, and I came around and I kind of kicked their heels out a little bit.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, and like, a lot of times people are like, that feels crooked. And I'm like, no, that's straight. Like
It's just that we've been doing it that certain way for so long that it feels straight to us.
Yeah. So the muscle spindle is used to being in this position, and it started telling the brain, this is full length, when in reality, this is full length, right? And we have altered proprioception. So that's why flexibility is so important. It really does alter our movement patterns. So we call that, there's sort of a term that we'll use here, right? So flexibility, obviously very important for proprioception. Your body understands where it is in space due to, we call them length tension relationships, right? Length tension relationship is just the length of a muscle and the amount of contraction that it can create at that length, right? So if you have an altered length tension relationship, a muscle that's overly shortened that can't contract the way it's supposed to, or a muscle that's overly lengthened that can't contract the way it's supposed to. If you have either of those scenarios happening, what you're going to end up with is altered proprioception, right? Senior clients experience this all the time. They will often experience altered length tension relationships, which changes their mechanics for walking, and it leads to like altered posture. But honestly, that happens to all of our clients, like you were telling me, you tend to have the habit of kind of walking with the externally rotated feet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's crazy because when I play basketball, I straighten them out.
Really?
Because I'm running, yeah. And I through time I've learned I play different than I walk.
Interesting. That actually is kind of fascinating, especially because like basketball is a very lateral game. And a lot of times people who have external rotation, it sometimes will manifest itself during lateral movements, especially.
Yeah.
Like, when you ever do like those basketball drills and you're supposed to like do some side shuffling, you always see that one person who turns their hips and they just start running, but they're still looking this way. I was like, that's not a shuffle, that's what you're running, that is, you can spot an external rotator like that sometimes. So senior clients get this a lot, right? So here's what the real problem with like altered proprioception is and altered length tension relationships. It leads to what we call relative flexibility. So altered flexibility or lack of flexibility leads to relative flexibility. So what I mean by relative flexibility is, it's kind of in the name a little bit, right? It's like, oh, touch your toes. And then they like do something where it's like, yeah, you touched your toes. You didn't move the way you're supposed to, like, it's like, yeah, you got the job done, but that's not really what I mean, right? It's relative to you, but that's not the way we're intended to move, right? That's kind of how I feel about like, a lot of times people will give CrossFit a lot of crap for the way they do pull-ups. They'll do those like circular, they call them butterfly pull-ups.
Yeah.
And people give it a lot of crap. Here's the thing. I do think that it's not fair to count them as regular pull-ups because you're using different muscles, but I do think it's a legitimate back exercise still. It's just a different back exercise, just like a chest press and a push-up and a bench press. They're different,
They're different, but they kind of do the same.
Yeah, it's still legitimate though, like, so I don't like to be fully on the CrossFit side. I also don't like to be fully on the snobby trainers who are trashing on them either. But talking about relative flexibility, imagine somebody who's like going to squat through a full, like, let's say they're going to squat, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to do this body weight squat. Now, ideally, they should have the flexibility to be able to like move through that range of motion. But let's instead say that they squat kind of like this. They do this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
The reason their knees caved in is because certain muscles were so tight, they didn't want to relax, and other muscles were so weak that they didn't contract properly.
Yeah.
So it's like, I did it. I did the squat. And it's like, you did, but you're putting stress in the wrong places, right? That's an example of relative flexibility. It's like you're not flexible in the ways that you need to be able to move the way you are supposed to. So relative flexibility, with the definition you'll see in your textbook, the one I want you to have up here, is it is the body finding the path of least resistance during a functional movement pattern. right? Like it's like the body finds a way to get the job done, even if it's not supposed to move that way. So for example, a client whose feet externally rotate while they're walking upstairs or something, or even while they're squatting, right? They're experiencing tightness in the calves. The calves don't want to relax, so they just turn the foot outward a little bit. And that's because they are experiencing limited dorsiflexion. And so instead, they get to keep doing plantar flexion, and they just turn the foot externally. And then that dorsiflexion doesn't have to happen, and they get through their full range of motion, or at least they feel like they get through their full range of motion. So we have various relative flexibility postures that we've been talking about for the last couple weeks now, right? We've got feet turn out, we've got knees cave in, we got the excessive forward lean, we got the anterior pelvic tilt, the posterior pelvic tilt, the shoulder rounding, the forward head posture, the shoulders out. All of those are examples of relative flexibility. It's like you found a way to get the job done, but it's not really good for you because you're putting stress on muscles that really aren't designed to be able to keep up with that stress. So because of all of that, we have to train our clients to improve their flexibility. We have all of our various flexibility training techniques that we are going to use, right? And so when we are talking about this, NASM is taking a very integrated approach to flexibility training. Because here's the thing, Dion, have you ever heard somebody say that you shouldn't stretch before you work out? You ever heard that?
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll say, why do they say that?
Because it'll like make you tired or make your muscles like weak or something.
Yep, exactly. So you hear that all the time. Here's the thing, that's actually partly true. There is some truth to what that is, but it's been kind of misinterpreted. So here's the thing about stretching, right? So static stretches in particular, and static stretches are the stretches that we think of when we usually think of stretching, right? When I think of stretching, yeah, like arm circles is actually a chest stretch, but I don't really think of it when it's not the first thing that pops into my head. When I think of like a chest stretch, I think of like a big long 30-second hold, So that big long 30-second hold, we got to be a little bit more specific about how we label out these stretches. We're going to call that a static stretch. Static stretches are long duration stretches. And the reason that they work, actually, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the reason that they work is because of this physiologic principle called autogenic inhibition. So we'll look at that in just a second here. But autogenic inhibition is actually hold on, let me just check it. I want to make sure I'm not getting too far ahead of myself. Yeah, it's going to come up in a couple slides. Okay. So when they're talking about that lack of flexibility, when they're saying like, hey, you shouldn't stretch before you work out because it makes you weaker, they're actually not wrong. It does deactivate part of your nervous system in that muscle, which makes that muscle weaker. But it doesn't work the way we think of as a straight reduction of strength. Like if I gave you a 10% discount on something, it's just 10%, whether that costs $100 or $500 or $1,000, 10%, right? The way that static stretches affect us is on kind of a sliding scale. So it affects us a lot if we're lifting at like 100% of our 1 rep max. It affects us a little bit less if we're lifting at like 90%, a little bit less at about 80%, a little bit less at about 70%. And then at like 60, below 70%, it honestly doesn't really even have much of an effect. So if I were having somebody lift at 50% of their 1 rep max, which would correspond to about 20 repetitions, I can do static stretches and it's not going to affect their strength at all. But yes, if I were lifting at like 95% of my 1 rep max, static stretches would slow me down a little bit. So now we want to be a little bit more specific about how we use this language when we say like stretching makes you weaker. We don't want to simplify it down like that. We want to say static stretches can reduce your 1 rep max from about the 100 to 70% range.
Okay.
Who's got time to say all that? you know? So that's why it's kind of gotten misinterpreted. But here's the thing. There's other stretching techniques, right? There's other things like foam rolling. That doesn't have any effect on your 1 rep max. Active stretches. Active stretches are those ones where they actually are the same stretches as static, except you don't hold them for 30 seconds. You hold them for about 1 to 2 seconds, and then you relax. 1 to 2, and then you relax, right? That style of stretching has been shown to have no effect on 1 rep max at all. So again, we don't want to say don't stretch before you work out. We would say don't static stretch before lifting heavy. And if you are lifting heavy, well, then you should still stretch, but do active stretches instead.
Okay.
And then here's the other thing. What about those like arm circles I talked about earlier? That's called a dynamic stretch. That's actually been shown to increase muscular activity. So that can actually make you more explosive and stronger. So if you care about speed of contraction, then we want to do dynamic stretches.
Okay, so that's what, so what about like mass? Like you would do those, you wouldn't do static stretching if you were like you were lifting or working out trying to gain mass. You wouldn't do
mass. Yes. So here's the thing, right? Mass gaining, right? We call that hypertrophy. That's the scientific name for it. You know, in the same way that like atrophy means shrinkage, hypertrophy means growth. So we look at the OPT model here. See how hypertrophy is right here?
Yeah.
Kind of in the middle. It is falling under this strength level. It's phase 3, which falls under level 2. So the strength level is where we do the active stretches. So yeah, your instincts are right on. If you're going for mass, no, don't do static stretches. But if you're doing stabilization, static stretches are great.
Okay.
So let's go, and that's kind of where sometimes talking about program design is a little bit hard, because it's like the reason for this is the thing that we're going to be talking about, you know, I think Tuesday, you know, and so it's like it kind of all has to happen all at once in a way, you know, because it's like your flexibility is related to the thing we're talking about, but you'll notice it all kind of comes together, and it's like big, you know, sort of like, you know, these lines here. So this is actually why one of the things we're going to be looking at today is this little chart that I made right here. So here's all how those rules kind of work, right? For clients in the stabilization level, we're going to do corrective flexibility techniques. For clients in the strength level, and that's any of these 3 phases, mass gaining, maximum strength gaining, like power lifters, or even strength endurance, like athletes, right, are still very much going to be at, you know, all strength versions. So they're going to do active flexibility. But then clients who are like trying to like jump and be super explosive, they're going to do those dynamic stretches. We call that functional flexibility. So I'm kind of getting a little ahead of myself, but start to see like, yeah, people have said that, and that's a very reductive way to talk about flexibility training. It's not that you don't want to stretch. It's that instead you want to do the right type of stretches for the right scenarios. So that's where NASM has the OPT model. That's why they created the OPT model. This is meant to cover all of the various scenarios. They all kind of feed into each other, right? And you'll start to notice that even applies to the cardio over here, which we'll be talking about, right? Like zone 1, you're not sprinting. Zone 3, you definitely are, which is why if you're sprinting, you want to be explosive. And if you want to be explosive, dynamic stretches help with that.
Okay.
All ties together. So we have a variety of different flexibility techniques, not just big, long static stretches. And they're great because all of them do have the same benefits in terms of increasing muscle tissue temperature, increasing blood flow to the area, which causes like healing, repair. Which is one of the reasons why we do it at the end of our workout, so we can get some blood in there, like restore all those nutrients, get rid of some of the lactic acid, you know. All this has really big benefits here. But we do it in the beginning of our workouts because for 2 reasons. Number 1, increasing muscle tissue temperature and blood flow means that your workout's going to be a little bit more effective because like there's going to be oxygen and nutrients there, and warm muscles are much less likely to spasm and much less likely to tear. we like a nice warm muscle. And then we are also going to pair our flexibility training with a little bit of a cardiovascular warm-up here, because that cardiovascular warm-up will further give us all those metabolic benefits of like increased tissue temperature, increase this, increase that. There's also going to be some really good stuff from that. So cardiovascular warm-ups are big, but also flexibility warm-ups are big. And then there's even one more really big benefit here. Flexibility training is a really good opportunity for us to turn off our overactive muscles. I don't want those, overactive muscles. It's hard to get the right muscles to fire at the right time. Those muscles want to contract. So I'm trying to shut them down on purpose before I get to the weight room. If I know that I'm like the type of person who like does this, right? I got those overactive trap muscles. And if I just take a little bit of time during my warm up to turn those off, when I go to do my rows, I'm likely to keep my shoulders down rather than doing this bad habit that I have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's another reason why we want to do this in the beginning of our workout, and why we as trainers want to be much more specific about what stretches we choose to give our clients, rather than like the way I was taught in gym class when I was in school. PE was the same every year.
Yeah.
Right. You go in on day one, teacher be like, all right, for us, the way they did, I don't know if they did this when you were in school the same way, but like they would have like a number on this wall and like a letter on that wall. And I would be like, all right, you're going to be in row B, spot number 6, and all the kids would go to their squares. You would line up on the grid. And then like the teacher would teach 6 or 7 stretches, it was always this one, right? He'd always be like, this one.
Yeah.
And then it was like this one, like, and I liked this one, but I hated the hamstring one. And so like, I would just do the ones I liked. We'd do this one, and then teacher wasn't watching, he wasn't paying attention. So I never did the ones I didn't like, and that's everybody's approach to stretching. They just stretch a little bit of general stuff. And it's like, we want to be specific. Like, let's stretch the stuff that's, let's stretch those problem muscles, turn those freaking things off.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, so we're going to break flexibility. So here's where it gets a little bit confusing. For the purpose of an integrated program design, NASM is going to organize flexibility training into various levels that correspond with the OPT model. So this is the OPT model. It's the staircase here. It consists of 3 levels: the stabilization level, the strength level, and the power level, and 5 phases. Phase 1, which is stabilization endurance, you can just call that stabilization. It's the stabilization phase within the stabilization level. That's all that exists. Strength endurance, hypertrophy, and max strength, all 3 of those are considered part of the strength level, and power corresponds with power. So here's the thing. You don't even have to worry about phases right now. We aren't even going to get into phases until we get into the final days of program design. Because for now, we're just worried about exercise selection. We're worried about picking the right exercises for the right moments. And exercise selection is determined by the level. Reps, sets, tempo, intensity, things like that, where it's like, should I do 12 reps? Should I do 6? Should I do 8? That is what's determined by the phases. And that doesn't apply to warm-ups. So we don't even have to worry about it for right now. So take a look right here. We can see when it comes to flexibility training, right? You're going to have these categories here that correspond with the specific levels: corrective flexibility for the stabilization level, active flexibility for the strength level, and functional flexibility for the power level. And then you will see there are tools within each category. So think of these as like tool bags, or think of them as toolboxes, right? If I've got a client in the stabilization level, I'm going to go grab my corrective flexibility tool bag. And the tools that I've got within that are foam rolling and static stretches. If I got a client in the strength level, I'm going to grab my active flexibility tool bag, which also has foam rolling in it, but instead of static stretch, it has active stretches. So that's how you want to kind of think about this, because that's how they'll quiz you. They'll say your client is in the strength level, which of the following stretches would be most appropriate? And then it'll say static 90-90 hamstring stretch, active 90-90 hamstring stretch, straight leg kicks, or static biceps femoris stretch. So it's like you have 2 static stretches, 1 active stretch, and 1 dynamic stretch, right? You would go, okay, they said they're in the strength level, therefore I need active flexibility, which means I need active stretches. Option B was my active stretch. And there's your right answer. Sounds really complicated, but the more you get familiar with this, the easier it flows. Those are our different techniques. So let's talk about what self-myofascial release is, because it is going to be used in every single one of the tool bags. So self-myofascial release focuses on your neural and your fascial systems by alleviating trigger points. So if you've ever seen, like, there's a really great book, if you ever want to pick it up, it's called the Trigger Point Therapy Workbook. It's a really cool little book that you can see here. It's like 20 bucks, $5 used. And it has all these really cool like charts and pictures inside that show you like where the most common trigger points are. However, if you are somewhat familiar with the body anyways, you don't really need this stuff. And we know that most of our trigger points are generally around the tendons. So where the muscles often insert. So you could even say, like, you know, Dan, we know we have those tight calf muscles, right? So we could go calf muscle trigger points. And the way they do trigger points, the way they like highlight them, they'll do pictures like this. They'll be like, look, do you have pain in this region? If so, this is the trigger point here. You want to place like a foam roller here, or a lacrosse ball, or, you know, whatever. And then they go, here's the origin of the muscle here. Here's the insertion on this side. Here's, you know, generally a tight spot here, right? And it's like if you have pain in any of this region. So that's kind of how trigger point therapy works. But the reason this works the way it does is because generally we want to put pressure on the Golgi tendon organs. So when you're foam rolling your calves, you can see here, actually, we'll watch Nassim's video on this because this is their YouTube channel. You can see here, he is putting emphasis. He's going to place one leg down. He's going to put his other leg down. That gives him a little bit of extra pressure. And he's going to roll until he finds that really tight spot. And so he rolled a little bit. And then once he found it, he can put even more pressure. You know, you can see he's putting his hands on the ground. He can like prop himself up if you want to, but he's sitting and holding, right? He's not actually rolling. He's doing a little bit of movement here and there. You can see little, you know, goes this way a little bit, goes that way a little bit, trying to find his tight spots because everybody's gonna be a little different, you know? And what that sustained pressure does is it creates that autogenic inhibition that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so foam rolling alleviates trigger points by creating this autogenic inhibition. Now, what autogenic inhibition is, if you look it up in your textbook, the definition will say it puts pressure on a Golgi tendon organ, which inhibits muscle spindles. So if we look at those two, you know, things that I was mentioning earlier about proprioception, right? You know, we've got those two sensory receptors that live within our muscles. The muscle spindle way too much. The muscle spindle's here. It's in the middle of the muscle fiber, right? It basically runs end to end in the muscle, and it tells the brain how long the muscle currently is. And then the Golgi tendon organ lives here in the tendon on either end, right? So a Golgi tendon organ would be about here, and there'd be another one right about here, and then the muscle spindle is running the entire length. Both of those guys are supposed to work together to communicate to our brain how long the muscle is, right? But here's the thing. This guy, the muscle spindle, often lies to the brain. Muscle spindles are dirty, filthy liars. They love to say, no, we couldn't possibly stretch any further. You know, we're at full length now when they've got all this space, right? The analogy that I like to use in my brain that nobody else is familiar with, but I like to use it, is it's the way my mom treats money with my dad. Like, she's always got stuff squirreled away in her purse, and my dad will be like, "You got any money?" And my mom will be like, "No." Yeah, but she totally does. That's kind of how muscle spindles are. They really do, you know, kind of lie to our brain. But here's the thing. If you put the Golgi tendon organ, its job is to sense how much tension's on the muscle. So like if I started stretching my muscle out, you know, and the Golgi tendon organ, which is, you know, it's in the tendon, right? The tendon is supposed to grip onto the bone. If I start pulling it away and it starts to lose its grip, right, it's going to rip right off the bone. So when that tension gets really, really high, it sends a signal to the brain going, whoa, 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 we're going to tear off the bone. You got to relax, you know, like you got to, you know, let go. So this is what we do when we do autogenic inhibition. We place the foam roller right around here, right around very near to the tendon, not on the joint, because we don't want to roll over any bony parts. But we place it near the Golgi tendon organ. And what happens is autogenic inhibition kicks in. This causes it to freak out, which is why foam rolling is sometimes a little uncomfortable. You're like, you feel that kind of ache. Where the muscle spindle starts to contract because it's thinking that there's so much tension, it thinks that it's going to tear off the bone. The muscle spindle is working with the Golgi tendon organ to create pain in the muscle. But then it realizes, oh my gosh, we are not going to win this battle. We're going to keep experiencing this tension. So then the muscle spindle realizes the safest option, the safest thing that it can do is relax to full length. And if it relaxes to full length, then there's going to be less tension where the tendon is attached to the bone. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's autogenic inhibition. And what the way you'll hear this written out in the book is it will say, it is autogenic inhibition is pressure on a Golgi tendon organ that overrides an overactive muscle spindle. So by putting pressure here, it basically tells the muscle spindle to shut up. It's like, hey, quit freaking out and just relax, and then we won't tear. And so we do that. We do that to deactivate our overactive muscles. It takes about 30 seconds, by the way. You got to give it time to kind of kick in. So tender spots should be held for a minimum of 30 seconds, and sometimes longer than that, depending on how freaking stubborn your muscles are. Mine, I feel like I'm in there for like a minute, you know? I'm just like, let go. So here's the thing. Not all older adults can really use like an actual foam roller. Sometimes that will cause like bruising. So instead we've got things like Thera Canes. And that's why we call it SMR, by the way, instead of just calling it foam rolling. Foam rolling is an example of SMR. SMR stands for self-myofascial release. You are using something, you're doing it yourself. Like technically getting a massage is assisted myofascial release, you know? But if you're doing it on your own, you know, that's SMR. But, you know, you can use like a Thera Cane, this little hook here. By the way, these are like $20. I really recommend getting one. They are awesome. I need to buy a new one because the last one was stolen out of my car. But they're great. And you just hook it right over your back and just kind of press it in there. And it gets all those hard to reach areas, like especially like your low back where you don't want to use a foam roller because it's just going to mash your spinal discs. You can use this and go off to the side of the discs. Awesome. Feels great. So that's the Thera Cane. You can also use what's called a tiger tail. Which is this little stick here. You'll sometimes see there's a lot of different like product versions out there. The tiger tail is the orange one. I can't remember what the stick. Yeah, I think it's that's what it's literally called, the stick. but like that's this version here with the little beads. And then there's whatever that one is, but they're all good. You know, they all work really well, and you can just kind of, it's like a rolling pin. I used to have a guy, he brought in a rolling pin as a joke, but everybody thought it was so funny. He kept bringing that thing in for like years. Whatever. Lacrosse ball, all of them are really good. They really help you kind of get into those hard to reach areas. So how do we do this? Well, we do it 1 to 2 times per muscle group, anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds. Yes, it will be a little uncomfortable, but make sure you hold those tender areas for at least 30 seconds. And then we want to follow up that foam rolling. We want to follow up that SMR with whatever, it does say static stretching here, but we want to follow it up with whatever type of stretches we're going to go with for that muscle group, right? So we foam roll first, we stretch second. And here's why, to use an analogy, think about like a shoelace, right? Or like even like look at my, you know, like if I pull this end to end, see how it's got like a little give, right? That's kind of like your muscles. Now, if I tie a knot in this and I pull it end to end, it still has give, but it'll never be as long as it can be until I untie this knot.
Yeah.
And that's what foam rolling does. Foam rolling unties the knot. But here's the thing, when I stretched it and when I tied this knot in it, if I can get this freaking thing undone, I've never actually done this for real. See how now it's got like a little kink in it?
Yeah.
That's why we stretch it out afterwards.
Okay.
Right? For two reasons. Number one, it's not going to be as effective if you stretch on its own anyways. And then number two, it keeps the knot from tying back up. I wish that it were actually as easy as freaking rope, but it still ends up finding a way to tie back up just, you know, while you're sleeping or throughout the day or whatever. And that's why like flexibility doesn't just get better overnight. You know, it's a freaking, you know, I'm still working on my hamstrings. Yes, but static stretches are the ones that are definitely most effective, because static stretching also uses autogenic inhibition. So the other way that you can put pressure on a Golgi tendon organ to activate that autogenic inhibition is just grabbing it end to end and pulling on it. That also puts pressure on the GTOs, you know what I mean? It's not the same as actually pressing onto it the way foam rolling is, but it is still pressure. So this also has been shown to decrease muscle spindle activity. And these are what a static stretch is, it's a low force, long duration stretch. So now if we look at clients who are in the stabilization level, we apply the corrective flexibility tool bag. And the two tools that are in that bag are foam rolling, or SMR, you know, tiger tails, Thera Canes, whatever, and static stretches. Both of these use autogenic inhibition as a principle, right? It applies pressure to the Golgi tendon organ, which tells the muscle spindle to relax, and then the muscle relaxes to full, you know, extended length. So we are going to do that for 1 to 2 sets as well, 30 to 60 seconds per stretch. We're always going to perform it after our foam rolling. We don't want to bounce. That's actually a really big deal. You see people do that all the time, where they're like stretching and they're like almost there. They do this kind of thing. That bouncing is so bad for you. It actually tightens up your muscles. It creates a stretch reflex. And stretch reflexes are the reason we use dynamic stretches to increase muscular activity. So it literally does the opposite of what we're trying to get it to do. So whenever I see a client bounce, I'm like, ugh, stop. And they're like, but it stretched further. And I'm like, yeah, but in 5 minutes, you're going to tighten up. Our acute variables, right? So corrective flexibility, the type of flexibility that improves joint range of motion and is utilized to correct postural distortions. It is SMR and static stretches for 1 to 2 sets, 30 seconds each. And that's any client who's in stabilization, AKA level 1, AKA phase 1. So you're starting to see how that staircase kind of works?
Yeah, it corresponds with whatever, yeah.
So we're going to see a lot of things, you know, as we sort of move through this staircase. So then we've got the PowerPoint's going to skip straight to dynamic stretches because it doesn't take into account active stretches, because for the most part, we're really not doing a lot of strength training with senior clients. But remember, my job is not to do the senior stuff, it's to do the regular. So we're going to step away from the PowerPoint for just a second. Let's look at a client who's in who's in level 2. So if I got a client in the strength level, which is either phases 2, 3, or 4, all of those are strength, they're going to do active flexibility. And active flexibility is still going to do foam rolling. That's all exactly the same. But now we don't want to deactivate our muscles anymore. This is all about gaining strength, right? So deactivating muscles is kind of the opposite of what we're going for here. So autogenic inhibition is not really recommended. Static stretches are the ones that leave your muscles groggy, which is not good for strength. And it's certainly not good for mass gaining either, because that's part of strength. So instead, we have active flexibility. Now, active flexibility is where you're going to hold your stretches for about 1 to 2 seconds per rep, and you're going to do about 5 to 10 repetitions. So if we go to NASM's YouTube channel here, and I look up like 90-90 hamstring stretch, we can see the static version, which is exactly what you think of when you think of a hamstring stretch, right? She's going to go here. She's going to take her hand back for support, and then she's just going to straighten the leg, hold it for about 30 seconds, right? You can watch the whole 30-second video, but we're not going to do that. But there's also the active version of this, which is exactly the same thing. If I, oh, come on, internet, give it to me. Where is it? All right, well, we'll use this person's demo. And he's going to go 1, 2. That's actually that's a long 2 seconds. Okay. You screwed the pooch guy. Put the 90-90 out. There we go. Okay, so she's gonna go 1, 2, and then he's talking, which is slowing the freaking process down. And then she's gonna relax. Oh, it's so dumb. Sorry, I'm like frustrated with the internet's examples here. I'm just gonna do it myself. So you're gonna go back here, and instead of just like a big long like 30-second hold, it's literally gonna be 1, 2, and then relax. 1, 2, and then relax. 1, 2, and then relax. So this is actually benefiting from a term that we used in kinesiology. We called it reciprocal inhibition. You remember that term?
Yeah.
It's where when I contract my bicep, my tricep relaxes, right? Yeah. The opposite muscle reciprocates. So we actually are, instead of just like holding a big long stretch for a while to make it like, oh, and then it just kind of relaxes. Instead, we're actually focused on the opposite muscle. We're focused on the antagonist. When I'm stretching my hamstring, what am I doing? I'm contracting my quad. So if I give a 2-second quad contraction, that is a 2-second relaxation in the hamstring. And then it relaxes, and then squeeze my quad for 2, and then relax, right? That's creating reciprocal inhibition, which is what we do when we do active stretches. This is one of the reasons why we study our agonist-antagonist relationship so much, so we know which muscles to contract. So for the strength level, we're going to do active flexibility. Active flexibility is flexibility training that utilizes reciprocal inhibition instead of autogenic to actively contract and relax muscles, resulting in increased range of motion. So we're going to do SMR first. That's going to deactivate things a little bit, but without making the muscle groggy. And then we're going to do active isolated stretches, which is part of that active flexibility. So we look at our tool bag. Active flexibility has active isolated stretches in them. And that's why the names are you know, when you're writing it, right? When you're writing a program for a client, you would say static so-and-so stretch for a stabilization client, and you would say active so-and-so stretch for a strength level client. And then in the acute variables, you would put 1 to 2 seconds, 5 to 10 reps for 1 to 2 sets. Any questions?
No.
Cool. I've got examples for this, by the way, here at the end. So lastly, we've got clients in the power level. And the power level, you're probably not going to have too many senior clients in the power level. This is really like the peak, right? A lot of athletic training is spent in the power level. And that is going to be focused on functional flexibility. So we call it functional flexibility, and it consists, that's the tool bag, right? And it consists of self-myofascial release still, plus dynamic stretches. And dynamic stretches are stretches that actually use your own muscles' force production to drive a joint through its complete range of motion. So this involves like muscular contractions. Like I would consider like body weight squats a dynamic stretch for certain clients. You know, like sometimes if I got a client in the stabilization level, a body weight squat could be strength training for them, you know? But then eventually, like once they're very well developed, I use it as a stretch in the end, you know? Same thing, you ever do like I imagine like push-ups are really not that difficult anymore, right?
No.
You ever do like T push-ups, the ones where you go down and then like you reach up like this?
Yeah.
That is a great stretch for your chest. So if I'm trying to warm your body up to keep you from tearing something during the workout, you know, using a T push-up as a dynamic stretch is a great way to get all this turned on before your super heavy bench press day. Or before you go do some clap push-ups or something like that. Obviously, I'm not going to roll directly into it, you know, but, you know, it's a great little warm-up. So that's dynamic stretches, right? It's a form of, dynamic stretching is a form of functional flexibility. So functional flexibility training that utilizes dynamic movements through all planes of motion to actively stretch and warm up the muscles. And you do want to think of like all the planes of motion, right? Like if I was trying to really warm up the upper body, right? I love like a good T push-up. I think that's a great one. Arm circles, which are very transverse, is really good. Arm swings, which is very sagittal, right? Now I've really got like every plane of motion working. I could do like some wall angels, very frontal plane, right? Band pulls, that's a really good one. Shoulder dislocations with like the broomstick, where you take it all the way up and over and then bring it back this way. All of those are just fantastic dynamic stretches. But if my client's not strong enough, doesn't have flexibility enough, doesn't have mobility enough to do any of those, I shouldn't be doing that, which is why it's at the top of the staircase.
Yeah.
So for when it comes to dynamic stretches, or when it comes to functional flexibility, rather, functional flexibility is flexibility that utilizes dynamic movements through all, did I understand this? Through all planes of motion to actively stretch and warm up the muscles. SMR plus dynamic stretches. You're going to pick, you see the acute variables here, it says 1 set of 10 repetitions. That, I'm going to go ahead and have you ignore that. That is the senior manual. Again, I want you to memorize the regular textbook. You're going to pick 3 to 10 exercises. You're going to do anywhere from 10 to 15 repetitions, and you're going to do 1 to 2 sets. So I got a handout here, which is up on Canvas, and then I'm going to attach it to tonight's email. Here's an example of, let's say I've got a client, and I'm going to, this is a very reductive example, but let's just say I've got a client that I'm going to take from level 1 for their first month of training, and they kill it, then I take them through level 2 and they crush it. And I'm like, all right, let's take you through level 3. So there's gonna be 3 months of training, same client, same overactive muscles in all scenarios, right? Because they're the same person. But let's take them through a 3-month cycle of training as if I progress them from one level to the next. So this is Bob. Bob wants to increase his athleticism to play golf. And So he has really tight calves, really tight hip flexors. Those are his two problem areas. So in month 1, January 1st, 2020, he's going to be in phase 1 here, which means that, like, because he's in phase 1, look at my staircase, that means he's in level 1, which means he's going to get corrective flexibility, which means I should be picking SMR and static stretches, which is exactly what we did. So we're going to SMR his calves, we're going to SMR his hip flexors, then we are going to do a static standing calf stretch, which, if I look that up, and you'll find that in your book, is this one. In fact, here's an awesome video showing how to do it. Let's actually watch that. It's the one I had you guys do where you support, it's sometimes called the runner stretch. And you drive the calf into the ground and you just hold it for 30 seconds. And you can see that here. I said, we're gonna do 1 set with a 30-second hold for each foot. And then he's gonna do a static kneeling hip flexor stretch, 1 set of 30 seconds with his knee on. And I put a coaching tip. I said, like, hey, put your knee on an RX pad. You know, I don't need you to grind your knee into the ground. But a static kneeling hip flexor stretch is this one right here. See, people do that one all the time, right? There it is. I probably do the one with the arm overhead because I like that one better. But and then lastly, you'll notice we did a static erector spinae stretch, and it's like, oh, why erector spinae? That one we didn't foam roll. It's like, well, we don't foam roll the erector spinae. If I had a lacrosse ball or a Thera Cane, I could, but we didn't have one available, so we skipped the SMR and we went straight to the stretch. Still beneficial, right? And that's this one right here. So it stretches out the low back a little bit. So now you might be thinking, okay, we stretched out the calves, the hip flexors, and the erector spinae. This is a person whose feet turn out and they have an anterior pelvic tilt, right? Like, start to see like what overactive patterns, right? The hip flexors and the erector spinae is going to help with that lower cross syndrome, and then the tight calves is going to help with the feet turning out. So now there's our warm up, and the same thing. And then I throw him for 5 minutes on the recumbent bike just to kind of get the heart rate warmed up. 50% of his heart rate max. We go back to, you know, all those numbers we punched in earlier. I know what Bob's resting heart rate is, and I know what his max heart rate is. So let's say Bob's 65, and let's say his resting heart rate is 75 beats per minute. So 220 minus 65. He has a max heart rate of 155. His resting heart rate was 75, so minus 75. I want him to warm up at 50% of his heart rate max. So I would go times 0.5, and then I would add that 75 back on. So I'd be like, Bob, I want your heart rate to be around 115 on the recumbent bike for about 5 minutes. And there we go. His body will get nice and warm. And I use the Carvin, that's the Carvinen formula. Where I took into account his resting heart rate, the heart rate reserve method. So now we're putting our assessment stuff together. And then for his cool down, he's going to do exactly the same thing. It's just in reverse. So it's like we stretched first, we did we foam rolled first, we did our stretches, then we did our cardio. For the cool down, we're going to do the bike first, and then we're going to do the foam rolling and the stretches. And I just kept it the same in both scenarios here. But you do notice that we put the cardio at the end here. It's like we made sure he had his full range of motion before we did the cardio. And on the way out, we kind of eased him out of working out by doing a little bit of gentle cardio before going into the actual stretch part. And then he leaves the gym. That's the whole workout. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Cool.
So now Bob killed it in month 1. So we're going to take him into the strength level. We're putting him into phase 2. Phase 2 is within level 2, right? So phase 2 is right here. He's going to go for endurance within the strength level, which means he's getting active flexibility. So now he's still got the same overactive muscles. So we're going to foam roll the we're going to SMR the calves and the hip flexor still. It's exactly the same as last time. But now, instead of doing a static calf stretch or a static hip flexor stretch or a static erector spinae stretch, we're going to do an active calf stretch. So he's only going to hold his stretch. Oh, I actually forgot to put this here. 1 to 2 seconds. Forgot to put that on here. So then I'm going to have him hold each stretch for about 1 to 2 seconds, and he's going to do 8 repetitions each, and he's going to do 2 sets of that. So he's going to do his calves, and he's going to do the hip flexors, then he's going to do the erector spinae, and then he'll go back and do each of those again for his second set. And then we threw him on the recumbent bike, 5 minutes, 50% of his heart rate max. Now, here's where this does get a little bit confusing the first time somebody sees this. You will notice on his cool down, I still put static stretches. And it really doesn't say this in your textbook explicitly, but here's the thing. Why did we avoid static stretches here? Because we didn't want it to affect our workout. Do I care about affecting his workout once the workout's over? No. And we know static stretch is the best way to improve range of motion. So for cool downs, you can do static every time, no matter what level your client's in. You really don't have to worry about that. I only care about the static stretches when I think it will affect their 1 rep max. And, you know, I don't care about them being a little weaker when they're hitting the gas pedal on the way home. You know what I mean? So that's Bob's second month. And then we got Bob's final month here. We put him in phase 5 here, which is level 3, right? Phase 5, level 3, which means he's going to get functional flexibility, which means we're going to do dynamic stretches. So he's still going to foam roll the calves. He's still going to foam roll the hip flexors. But now we are going to do a heel walk, which is a very goofy looking exercise, but is a great calf stretch. It looks real goofy, but trust me, it is quite effective. It looks like you have to go to the bathroom. like, oh, I gotta go. I mean, he's kind of going a little slow, but but yeah. So that's heel walks. That's a calf stretch, but it's also kind of a really good, you know, tibialis sort of activator. Then we've got butt kickers. This is a really good one. This is a really good one for the hip flexors, right? So just right here, very dynamic. You can see she's kind of got the bad habit of, look at her heels. She's turning her heels out. I would definitely coach that if I were there. And then we'll finish that up with what are called some hen pecs. These are called scoops. Uh-oh. This one's always really hard to find. There we go. This one right here. And that's really more of a hamstring stretch, but it does pull on the calves. You will still feel that kind of behind the back of the knee. So I do really like that one still. And then spinal rotations. Really good one for the erector spinae. Oh, that's a slow one. Here we go. This is a really good one. Please do the dynamic version. See, he's kind of going slow. What I mean is it's this one here, but you take it through and just bring yourself right back. So it's a very active, you know, dynamic stretch. And then lastly, the walking lunge with a twist, which is another one for the hip flexor. So he's going to lunge and he's going to twist, and you'll notice he's twisting towards his forward leg and away from his back one. That's what stretches those hip flexors out, by rotating to the opposite side. That's why we don't have them stretch this way, because then it actually, you know, they don't get the stretch out. So that's actually, there's a really good one too, right? Man, it's so funny Googling stuff online. I like, what it is like when I'm Googling stuff online, it's people instructing the video. You know, they're trying to like, so they'll hold for a big long time while they're talking and like explaining. And it's like, all I want is you to do it the way it's meant to be. Like, don't talk, just do it. like, because pausing is not part of doing it. I need you to not pause. Like, anyway, so you'll notice that I have it set up for 2 sets, 10 reps each, right? Now you might be noticing something is missing from the warm-up. Notice how I didn't put cardio here. One of the special rules that you'll see listed for the power level, because dynamic stretches actually are kind of like body weight exercises, your heart rate will go up naturally. So it kind of counts for your, it kind of counts as your cardio warm-up, which is why you'll see that in the book a lot of times. They'll skip the cardio section when your client's in phase 5. And then for our cool down, we kept it the same. And throw them on the recumbent bike for 5 minutes, SMR, and then static stretches because the workout's over. And that's 3 months. That's a 3-month progression. Now, I could have used, we put Bob in phase 2, but if this was 5 months of workouts and I had him in phase 3 and phase 4, the same active warm-up would be used every time. Or at least it could be used every time. Obviously, I'd probably actually want to give my client a little bit of variety to change it up a little bit. But I could, I perform it the same way. The flexibility training, the warm-up stuff, it's the same whether you're in hypertrophy, max strength, strength endurance, all of the phases are the same because that's all determined by the level. Sets and reps and stuff, that changes later down the line, but it doesn't apply to the flexibility training. Any questions on any of that?
No, it makes sense.
Cool, love that. All right, well, that is, that's your first one. So really quickly, just kind of wrapping things up for our first PowerPoint here. Just some precautions, some safety guidelines. Like I said, SMR, it's contraindicated for any clients with osteoporosis, spinal stenosis, low back pain, or varicose veins, or PAD, which are kind of the same thing, except this one's arteries, this one's veins. If they have any of those diseases, any of those, you want to avoid the foam roller. It's just a little bit too much pressure, causes bruising, things like that. Instead, you can use an alternative technique. Use the Thera Cane, use the tiger tail, lacrosse ball against the wall, things like that. Never bounce whenever you're doing static stretches. Dynamic stretches, you can bounce away. Remember I said dynamic stretches actually turn your muscles on. That happens because they create stretch reflexes. And stretch reflexes are great for activating your nervous system. It's why when you see like NFL players doing like the high jump, they do that little arm thing first and then they jump, right? That actually turns their nervous system on and makes their jump more explosive. We don't want that in our stretches unless it's a dynamic stretch, right? Ensure that they are breathing. Clients, obviously, as we get older, we start to have like hypertension problems. Holding your breath raises your blood pressure. We don't want that. So ensure that your client is breathing, even if they are holding big, long stretches. Cease any activity if any pain or discomfort is occurring, and always have assistance available if they're doing the type of stretch that like requires some balancing. So summarizing everything up, we know that stretching can improve muscle extensibility. We just want to end posture and movement patterns. We just want to make sure we're using the right type of stretches for the right type of client. We've got all kinds of different types. We've got SMR, which is going to be used basically for any type of client. We've got static stretches, which are really good for correcting posture. We got active stretches, which are really good for warming up the muscles and not turning the muscles off. And we've got dynamic stretches, which are actually really good for turning the muscles on. And then we want to manipulate the duration, the intensity, and the velocity with those various different techniques. All right, let's go ahead and talk about cardio. Cardio is a little bit more simple. It's a little bit easier. The notes look a little bit longer, but honestly, it's actually much more basic. We're going to be talking about the importance of cardiovascular training. We will talk about the rationale, why it's so important, how to program for it, and we will be reviewing our FIT principles again. Like I warned you, The first time they ever showed up, man, does NASM love to talk about the fifth principles. And I think it's so easy. I think it's like there's some of the easiest things to memorize, but they are also the thing that shows up all the freaking time. So in general, when you are writing a cardio program, you want to consider your fit principles: the frequency, the intensity, the time, the type, and the enjoyment factors here. So frequency is the number of sessions in a given time period. For our older adult clients, and really for any client, it's about 2 to 5 days per week for most people. The intensity is the level of demand. That's going to be anywhere from 40 to 85% of your VO2 peak. Here's the thing, we often don't base it on VO2 max. A lot of times instead, we base it on the thing that's easiest to measure, which is our heart rate. So for our senior clients, 40 to 85% of their VO2 max is anywhere from about 65% of their heart rate max, actually about 50% of their heart rate max, up to about 85% heart rate max. And that's why we have like our different zones. We'll talk about that in just a moment. The time is the length of time in the given activity. In general, for senior clients, we're going to recommend about 30 to 60 minutes sessions. But if they cannot do that, we want to accumulate 30 to 60 minutes a day. So that could be broken up into 3 10-minute bouts of exercise. If they can't really commit, if they don't have the endurance to get through a full 30-minute session, but we still want to see positive cardiovascular benefits, we can do 3 10-minute sessions. Fun fact, and this used to be in our books, the version that I got certified in, they used to talk about this all the time, but then they took it out. But fun fact, if you do 3 10-minute bouts of cardio, that has nearly identical benefits as 30 straight minutes. Calories burned, exactly the same. It is not a way to improve your endurance the same. Like if you're trying to learn how to run a marathon, obviously running like, 10 minutes at a time is not going to help. But in terms of like cardiovascular benefits, calorie burn, all that, it's nearly identical. So, there's plenty of times where I've had to tell myself that, where I'm just like, my day got crammed. I'm not going to have time to work out today. So what I'll do is I'll just do like 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the middle of the day, 10 minutes at night. It's not going to help with my endurance, but it will help me maintain the same calorie burn. So I'll just do a couple little like Tabatas or something. Type is the mode of exercise. Generally for senior clients, we like treadmills because they have good hand support and they don't require too much balance. We like recumbent bikes because they're able to sit. It's very, very safe. And we like swimming. Swimming is a really good option. That's why we see so many of those, sort of like senior, like group exercise, aerobics, water classes, right? I love those. I love water aerobics classes. I used to teach them all the time. And then the enjoyment factor. The enjoyment factor is the level of pleasure derived from the activity. When you're writing a cardio program, you do want to make sure that it's somewhat enjoyable. Pick the type of cardio that your client's going to enjoy. Again, water aerobics classes, right? They're a blast. So we got a lot of different methods for monitoring intensity, and my favorite is always going to be max heart rate. That's why I love heart rate watches and heart rate monitors. Dion, you ever used one of those?
Yeah, heart rate monitor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you use the wrist one, or have you ever used one of the chest straps?
Yeah, I used the wrist one, but I've used the chest strap before.
You never used one?
Yeah.
They're awesome. They are kind of expensive. Like they're like $100 on their own. But man, they're great. And if you can handle like wear, it is kind of annoying to have to put it on,
Yeah.
But dude, they are amazing. Because they're just so accurate and they're just in real time, because here's how these work. Like this basically uses like a green light to shine through your skin, and it basically, because like red's on sort of the opposite spectrum as like green, and your blood is red, right? It basically is just counting how often it sees blood cells go by, which is pretty accurate the lower your heart rate is. But as your heart rate starts to get really fast, it kind of all starts to look like one big stream. So they get a little bit less accurate when you're exercising, which is kind of a bummer. They're still not bad though. Like they're better than nothing for sure. And I'm a big fan. And on days where I don't want to use my chest strap one, I'm just like, yeah, we're just gonna use this, you know. But the chest strap one, your heart has a specific frequency of electricity that it generates every time it beats. And so that little monitor picks up on every time that electric signal gets made, which is why it's really freaking accurate. So anyway, I love a good chest strap monitor. And using your actual specific heart rate is the most accurate way, you know, to work yourself through. And there's so many times where like I'll be on a run and I'll be like, man, I just feel like I'm killing it right now. And there's no way I could go any faster. And then I look down at my heart rate and it's like my heart rate's fine. And I'm like, oh, it's all in my head. I got to push through. And so then I'll like work hard and I feel great. And I'm like, you know what? The heart rate monitor knew, you know, it was right. I was wrong. Like my human emotional brain said that I had nothing left in the tank, but science disagreed. Love it. So
like your mind sets limitations on how you're feeling or whatever.
Right? Yeah. It's oh man. We were just talking about David Goggins the other day. Have you ever heard of him? He's like he wanted to get into the Navy SEALs. David Goggins. You might recognize him if I pull a picture up. But he basically
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So he was really overweight and he wanted to become a Navy SEAL, but he had to get under a specific like body weight in order to be able to do that. And so he lost like a crazy, part of me almost doesn't believe it because I'm like, that is so much weight in such a short time.
Yeah.
But he lost a ton of weight in a really brief period. And then he became like a motivational speaker. He got into the SEALs, you know, trained for years. And then he like, now he does like ultra marathons. He did like a marathon a day for like 30 straight days or something like that. Just, you know, crazy athletic dude. And his whole thing is like, don't let your brain get in the way of progress, you know? Yeah. And his big thing, he like, I think he has like a quote, you know, it's like when you feel you're done. Yeah, when you think you're done, you're only about 40% of the way to your limits. I don't know where he came up with that number, 40%, but like I do find that really motivating. So anyway, we monitor intensity. We love the zones. We're going to talk about the zones today, but we also really like these other two methods as well. One of them is going to be the rating of perceived exertion, or RPE scale. This is more commonly named after the guy who labeled it. It's called the Borg scale. It measures exercise intensity based on the perception of how hard that exercise is. So you'd basically ask your client on a scale of 6 to 20, how hard was that round of cardio? And they'll tell you, right? So they'll say it was, you know, so-and-so, right? So this is based on their sensations, how hard they feel their chest pounding, what their respiration rate is, maybe how much they're sweating, or generally just like how fatigued they are. And it's actually pretty good. In fact, the Borg scale has been used for cardio for years now, but lately, powerlifters, weightlifters have actually been starting to incorporate it into like their lifting sessions. And so they'll say like, hey, this set should feel like an RPE of 7. Or sometimes the new thing is they'll call it reps in reserve. They'll use the RER scale. That's been getting popular in the last couple of years. And it's like, you should only have 3 reps in reserve, you know? So like you get done with your set and it's like, I could probably do about 3 more, you know, and then rack it. That's great, you know, depending on how we want you to feel. But similar to the RPE scale, but that's been getting popular. It's 6 to 20, which is kind of weird, but if you think about it, it's like the lowest your heart rate is like 60. The highest it'll ever get's around 200 for most people. So that's actually where that scale came from. But you can also always use like the modified Borg scale, which is like 1 to 10. And so exercise in general, if we look at the RPE scale, we look at our cardio zones here. This is the chart that's in your textbook. Oh, where's my high quality one? This is the chart that's in your textbook. So generally zone 1 is going to correspond with an RPE of about 12 to 13. And you will notice clients in the stabilization level are pretty much only going to use zone 1. We'll talk about the stages here in just a moment. So that's the Borg scale, right? RPE of 12 to 13. The modified version of that, the 1 to 10 version of that, it's about a 6, maybe a 7, you know? So then we've also got the talk test method, right? Oh, actually, hold on. And then the other two zones, zone 2, that's an RPE of like 14 to 16. Modified version, that's like a 7 or an 8. And then there's zone 3, which is like 17 to 19 on the 6 to 20 scale. Modified Borg scale, that's like an 8 or a 9. Maybe a 9 or a 10, but really we don't ever want to take most of our clients up to 10 because that means they're about to throw up. We've also got the talk test method. So the talk test method is you're going to gauge exercise intensity based on how difficult it is to talk. So if we consider like that zone 1, you know, that sort of yellow RPE scale, right? You know, your client should be able to speak pretty comfortably. Zone 2, your client should have some difficulty speaking, should be uncomfortable, but not impossible. And then zone 3, it's like your client finds it difficult to speak because they're literally so out of breath. So that's the talk test method. I really like both of these, you know. I like to continually check in with my clients all the time. I love to gauge how they're talking. Be like, walk me through how you're feeling right now, and then get them speaking. And if I can hear a lot of breath in their voice, or if their sentences are all busted up, it tells me like how hard they're working. But generally, if we're going to get really specific about it, we are going to use some very specific stage training. We're going to base the exercise intensity on the percentage of their heart rate max, right? This is pretty advanced. Not every client's going to be into it. Not every client's going to want to use a heart rate monitor. They're just going to want to base it on how they feel. And that's fine. I think that still works. But this often, the actual percentage of heart rate often requires a heart rate monitor because it's just not very comfortable to have to freaking take your heart rate, you know, while you're jogging down the track. You know what I mean? It's not super convenient all the time. So breaking these stages down, think of these just like we did with our flexibility training. Think of them as tool bags, right? Clients who are in the stabilization level, we're going to use our stage 1 tool bag. Clients who are in the strength level, we're going to use our stage 2 tool bag. And clients who are in the power level, we're going to use our stage 3 tool bag. You will notice, by the way, this is kind of a weird thing, and it's one of the ways you can tell NASM is distinguishing between stages and zones. The stages are always written with Roman numerals. So stage I, stage II, and stage III. Versus the zones, which use the kind of classic Arabic numerals, right? 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So clients who are in the stabilization level, they get stage 1 workouts. Stage 1, it only consists of zone 1. Clients who are in stage 2, they get stage 2. Stage 2 is a tool bag that has zone 1 in it for recovery and zone 2 in it for work. And then clients who are in the power level are going to get stage 3 in their tool bag. That tool bag has zones 3, zones 2, and zone 1. Zone 1 is for recovery, and zone 2 is kind of for recovery, and zone 3 is for peak work efficiency. So taking a look at that, right? Our cardiorespiratory training program, right? For clients who are in the stabilization level, that's level 1 in phase 1, they're going to get stage 1 cardiorespiratory routines. This is the baseline cardio routine that improves overall fitness levels for sedentary individuals. When you think of like going for a run, that's steady state cardio, right? That's sort of what we're talking about here. You want to start by working up 30 to 60 minutes if they can, somewhere between 65 and 75% of their heart rate max, which is that zone 1. Or you want to say, hey, I want you to go for a jog a couple times this week, and I want it to be on an RPE of like 12 to 13, right? I'll put that down here actually. So they should be able to maintain a conversation the whole time. That's your gentle sort of zone 1 cardio, right? An RP of like, 12 to 13. Now, once they can maintain that for like a full 30 minutes, what you should do is you should retest your client through like the YMCA step test, or you should retest them through the Rockport walk test and see if they've progressed into stage 2. But generally, as a rule of thumb, if they can do 30 minutes of straight zone 1, if they can maintain 65 to 75% of their heart rate max for 30 straight minutes, they're probably pretty good to move into stage 2. So stage 2 is reserved. It's the tool bag for any of our clients in level 2. So if they are in strength endurance or hypertrophy or max strength, they qualify for stage 2 cardio in general. Now, here's the thing. You will sometimes have clients that progress into strength, but still have very bad cardio, and they're not necessarily ready for it. If that's the case, you can kind of blend things around, and yeah, you can have a client in hypertrophy who's doing steady state cardio. But the reason we do this type of cardio with clients in the strength level is it actually is the type of cardio that actually supports strength training. So it starts to become interval training. So what it would do is you would maybe pop up into zone 2 for, let's say, 1 minute, right? So you're going to push your lactate threshold a little bit, or you're working really hard. Now, nobody should be able to really maintain zone 2 for like really long extended periods of time. If they can extend it for the periods of time for really long, that means that their heart rate's able to keep up with things. They're not really creating that much lactic acid. That's probably actually zone 1 for them. Nobody can really maintain 85% of their heart rate max for like super, super, super long stretches of time, right? You just can't. So what starts to happen is when you get up into 85%, the 85% range, or even the 80% range, or even the 76% range, right? Your body is producing so much lactic acid because you're working so hard that lactic acid is starting to accumulate in your blood, which is great. But eventually it's going to cause your legs to feel really heavy. You're going to get that burn. You're going to need to slow down and recover in zone 1. That's actually why it supports our strength level so efficiently. Strength, whether it's endurance, hypertrophy, or even max strength, creates a lot of lactic acid as a byproduct of that strength training. Now, down here in stabilization, you were lifting at such a low intensity, we'll say 50 to 70% of your 1 rep max. I'll teach you that on Tuesday. You were lifting at such a low intensity that the lactic acid was getting cleared out by your aerobic energy system. But here you're lifting so heavy, it's not getting cleared out. That lactic acid's kind of sitting in the muscles. Well, the same thing is true of zone 2 and zone 3, actually. You create so much lactic acid that you learn how to deal with it. So that's actually why this type of cardio actually supports our strength training. Now, obviously, it also burns a lot of calories, which means it's not so good for mass gaining. If you're trying to like really, gain a lot of muscle mass, you don't really want to be burning that many calories, but it is the type of cardio that supports it. So doing just a little bit of it, maybe once or twice a week, can have some really big benefits, even for bodybuilders. So that's stage 2 cardio. Do you have a question, Dion? Does that make sense?
No.
Okay. So we actually do like cardio for bodybuilders. We like interval cardio. We like, stuff that makes lots of lactic acid. Steady state marathoning, that's not really what we're looking for here. So It is the introduction to interval training, and it focuses on further increasing our cardiovascular capabilities. What I mean by that is it increases your lactate threshold, the threshold at which you can deal with lactic acid burning, which is why it's so good for, strength training, right? So this is going to consist of zone 2 and zone 1. You might do 1 minute in zone 2, and then you might recover and get rid of that lactic acid in zone 1 for maybe like 1 or 2 minutes, and then rinse and repeat and kind of go back and forth. So zone 2 is going to be that RPE of like 14 to 16, right? 14 to 16, or we could say that that is 76 to 85% of the 1 rep max. So that's what we mean when we say zone 2. And then zone 1 is the same as it used to be. And then lastly, we have clients who are in stage 3. This is going to apply to any of our clients. We're going to grab our stage 3 tool bag whenever we've got a client in the power level. Again, if they qualify. Occasionally you'll have clients move into that level who their cardio is not quite keeping up. But the stuff that we do in stage 3 supports our power, because stage 3 is like sprinting, which does help with leg power, right? So there is an association there. So for clients in stage 3, this is an advanced cardio training for clients with an established base and a high lactate threshold. The idea here is that you are enhancing peak work capacity. We are getting your heart rate up friggin' high, right? Like 95% sometimes. This should obviously be used with caution for every client, but especially seniors. So you might warm up for 5 to 10 minutes in zone 1, take yourself up into zone 2 for about 2 minutes, and then try, if you can, to do zone 3 for like a full minute, but most people will not be able to even do it for that long, and then recover in zone 2. This is what we refer to when we consider it like high intensity interval training, or HIIT training, HIIT, right? So that's an RPE of like 18 through 19, right? That's a really high RPE there, or I guess 17 to 19. That if we are using the talk test, talking should be very uncomfortable, right? Really challenging stuff there for them to be able to actually speak. And then we can do multiple rounds of that, right? We would do like, get up into zone 3, recover in zone 1, like up and down and up and down and up and down. And that's really, really good because we'll talk about this in later classes, but it actually extends your calorie burn out beyond the workout. You get this stuff called, we call it EPOC, or excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. If you've ever heard somebody say you burn more calories once the workout is over, that's what you get from HIIT training. It's why it's so effective. So you might notice it's like, okay, so stage 1 has zone 1, stage 2 has zones 1 and 2, and stage 3 has zones 1, 2, and 3 in it. And we basically just play with the intensities, and we do like these very interesting like intervals, right? So it might look something. Let's see if I could Google just like a picture of this. Yeah. So maybe this is what your interval training kind of looks like, right? And it's like you start in zone, in the gray zone here, it's like your warm up, right? You're even below zone 1. And then you get yourself into zone 2, bring it into zone 3, recover, bring it up even higher, recover, bring it up even higher, recover. And then it's like, all right, let's do it to it, like really freaking intense sprints there. And then we're recovering back and forth. And that might be what someone's heart rate kind of looks like. Or, if you were to write this out in sort of a bar chart version, maybe it looks something like this. Trying to find like somebody's HIIT routine. hit routine with, no, not quite finding like a visual aid that I'm super happy with, but basically it would look something kind of like this, right? You take yourself up into those different zones every time. Here's an ASM version, actually. Oh, that's pixelated, but you can see here, right? Warm up for 5 to 10 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes here, 1 minute there, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. I don't hate 1, 1, 1s. I think those are kind of boring personally. I love cardio that is like real complicated where you kind of go back and forth all the time. So that's all cardio. Now, obviously, you might be thinking of like circuit training as cardio, like a boot camp style thing, right? This is an alternative version to just getting on the treadmill, and this works really well as well. You know, if you're doing strength training with minimal rest, that is still very much like cardio training, right? So here are some sort of examples depending on like how you're going to do it with your client, but you can see maybe we do 5 to 10 minutes of flexibility training, right? We do a little bit of SMR and static stretches. Maybe do 5 to 10 minutes of, throw them on the treadmill, get the heart rate up a little bit, and then do 15 to 20 minutes of like circuit training. And then maybe with a senior client, you actually purposefully alternate between upper and lower body. We call that peripheral heart action circuit training. We go upper body, lower body, upper body, lower body. And that way they're getting a little bit of blood vessel work there. Throw them back on the treadmill for 5 to 10 minutes, stretch them out and send them home. This is a pretty good workout for a client who's focused on, improving their cardiovascular system, right? And this works for a 60-minute session, 10, 20, 40, 50, 60 minutes. There's your hour. And then maybe they have like specific strength training days in between there. But like I would do something like this even for myself, where I do a little bit of stretching and then just like 10 minutes on the treadmill, go for a 10-minute jog or something, and do some squats, do some shoulder presses, do some lunges, do some lateral raises, do some floor bridges, do some chest presses, like upper body, lower body, and then go for another jog, stretch it out, go home. Then I have like my specific really intense days later, So safety guidelines for senior clients, make sure you're always using safety clips if they are on the cardio, like treadmill stuff. You should always be using those safety clips in case they ever lose their footing. Advise them to wear proper clothing so they don't catch hunting. We talked about this yesterday, right? I don't know what it is with senior clients, but they love those freaking baggy windbreakers. Those things get caught on the pins and it drives me, I think it's so dangerous. I realize now what my shop teacher was talking about, when he was like, when I was in high school and they were like, don't wear baggy clothing to my class, always give them an orientation, teach them how to use your, the cardio equipment at whatever gym you're working at. Always monitor for symptoms of exhaustion or fatigue, so they don't get sloppy and hurt themselves. And always warm up. Then you can do the cardio, which we call conditioning, and then cool them down. So give you an example of that. We go back to Bob here. You'll notice that we had our cardio conditioning. I added this section here, but normally you can just put it in the warm-up section, or you could put it in the resistance section, wherever it fits. But for him, we started him with just treadmill walking for 30 straight minutes, 65 to 75% of his heart rate max, right? Now, I could just write 65 to 75% of his heart rate max, but if I were giving this to Bob to make him do his homework and stuff, I probably wouldn't just write it like that. I would actually probably say, RPE of, we go back and we look at our zone 1 here in our notes. We would say that RPE of 12 to 13, right? So I'd say RPE of 12 to 13, or I might say should be able to hold a conversation the whole time, right? Maybe that's what I say. Or if Bob's got a heart rate monitor, what did I say earlier, right? I said he's 65 years old. His max heart rate was 75. So 220 minus 65, right? Minus his resting heart rate of 75. And then I want to go between 65 and 75%. So I go times 0.65. That's 52. And then I add his resting heart rate back on. So I'd say a heart rate 127 to 135, if I wanted to be really specific about it. So that's his zone 1 routine. And that's just steady state cardio, like 30 minutes of that, right? Let's put that back. But that's how I'd be very specific with my clients, which I usually am. But then let's look at the month 2, right? We're going to have him do 5 sets of 1 minute at zone 1 and 3 minutes. 1 minute in zone 2 and 3 minutes of zone 1. So he brings his heart rate up for 1 minute and then he gets to recover for 3 minutes. And he's going to do 5 rounds of that. So that's 4 minutes times 5. That's about 20 minutes of cardio, which is great because that's going to support phase 2 really, really well. It's not going to burn too many calories to reduce his strength, but it's going to be just enough calories to support it, right? So again, zone 2 for 1 minute, zone 1 for 2 minutes. And he's just back and forth between those two. But then in month 3, it's like we're going to get tough, right? We're going to have him do 30 seconds in zone 3, 1 minute in zone 2, and then 1 minute of recovery in zone 1, and then repeat. He's going to do 8 rounds of that. That's 2.5 minutes total for every round. So 2.5 times 8, 20 minutes of cardio. And there we go. That's the interval training, right? And that's one way to ride it. My clients don't always love this, so there's other ways that I'll ride. Sometimes I'll just put it on its own little table and I'll send it to them. Or a lot of times I will find routines on the treadmills. I'll go into my gym and I'll play around with, like, how they have those preset routines.
Yeah.
And I'll teach my clients, like, all right, this month I want you doing this one. This month I want you doing this one. Next month I want you doing this one. And I'll just have them do different versions of that as well. Which is why it does help to be familiar with your cardio at your gym. Did that make sense though? How you write the cardio stuff?
Yeah, it makes sense. I like how it's in that format.
Yeah, it's helpful, right? It's really helpful. And there's a million different ones out there, there's even, like, man, there used to be this, it's still around actually, if you ever want to download it. This is kind of fun. There's this app called Zombies Run.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of this?
Oh,
it's wild. So it has different chapters and it builds you up slowly over time. So chapter 1's pretty gentle and then it gets harder. And basically you'll put your earbuds in. Here, we'll listen to a brief little bit here.
Oh, like you're running from zombies.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, that's a review. Hold on.
Financial advisor, your Uncle Jim. He knows everything about the stock market, just like he knows everything about quantum physics and coffee roasting and Australia.
Don't trust Uncle.
Yeah, check this out.
Run 5, we had a zombie attack last night and we're low on everything. We need whatever you can find. Get going.
So it'll be like, we need you to go gather food and water and supplies. And so you run out and then it's like, there's a pack behind you according to the GPS. And so you have to pick up your pace.
Oh, wow. That's nice.
So cool. All right, man. Any questions today?
Nope. Everything was good. Good.
Well, dude, I appreciate your patience. Oh, this morning was crazy. I cannot believe. I was telling my roommates, I was like, like with Zoom, obviously, like sometimes my internet will go down and I'll be like, hey guys, I'm sorry, I got to cancel class and stuff. But like, I'm never just like late for work. Like that's just not who I am.
Yeah.
So like, I was like full on spiraling this morning. So I really appreciate your patience. I can't tell you enough.
Appreciate you.
All right, man. So we're gonna wrap up today. You got a great weekend ahead of you. Homework number 2 is up now, up on Canvas. So feel free to knock that out. It was your first real like program design stuff today. It's like finally got to see some actual OPT templates. So like I said, you're gonna be sick of it by the time I'm done with you.
That means I'll know it.
Yep, exactly. All right, Dion, thanks for coming. I'll see you Monday.
All right. Have a good weekend.
You too, man.
All right.